Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. I guarantee you we're going to have a conversation today with Emily Askham that is going to expand quite a bit about the role of who we are as CMOs, what we can do, our contributions to the go-to-market strategy, the things that we need to be thinking about. We're actually going to be talking about the pre-decision playbook. So B2B buyers, they're coming to us already predisposed. Before they ever want to talk to anybody in the company, they've made their decision, or at least they've picked a winner. There's a lot of research that's come out recently on that. We're going to talk a little bit about it. But Emily, you are the CMO of Natixis Investment Management, and you've been in the financial space for a long time. You're actually an Australian that's lived in London for a long time. But one of the things that I think defines you probably the most right now is you are a CMO, a Chief Mom Officer. You have small kids at home, and I know that's a really important part of your life, and you're passionate about that balance in work life and being a C-suite executive at the same time. So if I didn't take all your thunder, I'd love to just have you maybe explain a little bit more about your background before we get started here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve, for having me on the podcast today. I'm really excited to be here. So, Emily Askham, working for Natixis Investment Managers, and I've been in B2B financial services for over 15 years, working across kind of pensions, insurance, asset management. And B2B is my domain. Really excited to talk to you about that today. And yes, you alluded to, obviously, I have two CMO roles. One is my Chief Marketing Officer role, and one is my Chief Mummy Officer role, as my team like to call it. I'm really passionate, obviously, about showing people that you can have leadership positions, be a C-suite executive, and have that family life. And how do you bring those two together? So that's more of a personal passion for me. But yeah, that's a little bit about who I am and kind of what I do.
Fantastic. So let's just jump right in here. The idea of trust in B2B sales and marketing, right? Why is it so important? Let's just kind of start with the foundation there.
Yeah, why is it so important? I always come back to this kind of one quote that we talk about in the office. And that's really like, if you don't trust the people or the organizations looking after your money, then what's left in the relationship? It's a big part. We have a huge responsibility when it comes to looking after people's financial futures, looking after their investments, planning for their retirement, these sorts of things. And trust is so critical in that because we're playing such a critical role in their lifestyles. And that's retail, but also kind of in our institutional space as well. So without trust, I say we have nothing. So that's the statement I'd open with in regards to that. I think the harder part is really about how you build that trust that evolves over time. And we've had a couple of conversations around, in B2B, the sales life cycle is much longer. It's between 12 and 18 months for us. So how do you actually start building trust before you've even engaged with a client or before you've even started to have that physical relationship with them? That's what I'm passionate about and where I see the role of marketing being much more critical from that perspective. Recent research has showed that 87% of buyers really classify trust as being an essential part of their decision-making process. So it is something that we need to consider. How do we include it and when does that come in?
It's interesting because many moons ago when I got married, one of the first things that my wife and I said to each other was, if we don't have trust in our relationship, we don't have anything, right?
Wow.
I think what you're saying here, that's what I was just thinking about. Really, without trust,
Yeah.
there isn't anything in the world of B2B, especially in these long sales cycles that we have, right? But what I want to do is I want to ask you about how do you build trust? What are the foundations in your mind of trust in the B2B environment between companies selling to companies? If we can define what we want that trust to stand for, then I think we can then peel the onion back and say, okay, now how do we start building that trust? But what is trust in a B2B environment in your mind?
I think trust in a B2B environment here is it has to be someone that you can work with and you know what you're expecting from them, but also someone who understands you, someone who's able to listen to you, understand your needs, and then actually provide for you. And sometimes we become quite transactional because we have products or solutions that we're going to sell. But actually, we have to strip that back a little bit and try and understand who our clients are, what they're expecting of us, and how we can help them. If we can help them and provide a value add or provide a much more personal experience for them, that is going to build the trust for you. But I think without starting that process, we don't have anything.
An add-on question to that is, my own belief is that in building that trust, we try to do it very narrowly. In other words, like you mentioned, our products and our services, right? We try to do it improving how we can help them by what we do. But this trusted advisor kind of status that we need to be at, doesn't that need to include really the challenges that our ICP, our ideal customer profile, they have challenges in their job that they want us to have context with. They want us to understand what they're trying to get done, what would make them successful in their careers and their companies. But we tend to talk about this, which is what we do, where we really need to know this,
Yeah,
right?
it's a really valid point, and I think it's something that we see a lot in B2B and particularly in financial services space. We have a product which we're pushing, we have commercial targets which are attached to that. The way that the industry is evolving is much more around actually listening to our clients, understanding what they need, and then being able to provide a solution for them that meets those needs. So I think it's really about changing that role and having the products and solutions that may be suitable, but also really understanding your client and being able to match the solutions to meet the client need. So focusing much more on a client need perspective rather than a product perspective. And then also we talk a little bit about like how we actually build that and providing those value added services. So I'll give a tangible example. We look at investment portfolios in our world, and one of the services that we added in was having an independent financial advisor solutions team, we called them, actually come in and look at the portfolio and say, look, we're going to do a free analysis of your portfolio and show you where you're strong, where your allocations are strong, and also where you have some overlaps, because as they add products over time, there is overlaps with what they're doing. That essentially is a free service. And that for us then trust, it gives them something to go away and think about and also add some value into what they're doing. So it's educating and helping them evolve their business. What then it entails us to do as well is open that door to actually look at where they're challenged, where they've got those gaps, what opportunities we may have that could also fill those gaps. Now, we may not always have the opportunities that are perfect for their needs, but one, we've actually highlighted that and helped them establish where they are. And then secondly, it opens the door for a conversation, which is much more around what's going to fit their needs versus coming in with a kind of product push or sell. So there's some ideas that we have around actually how you can provide that value added service to build that trust, but also to open the door to future opportunities.
So that free service, that looking at their portfolio, is that their entire portfolio or the funds that they've allocated to you?
Yeah, so we actually can look at all the portfolios, but we also do just look at the ones that are associated with us. It just depends on what the client wants or needs and how open they want to be with us. With Natixis Investment Managers, we are a multi-affiliate model. And what that means is that we actually have over 15 asset managers who we distribute the products for. So that allows us a pretty big breadth in regards to the product offerings that we can capture as well. So we've got quite an extensive piece, which will be our product, but at the same time, we're open to looking at other product as well.
So here's the point that I think is so phenomenal what you're doing there. And a key learning for anybody that's listening or watching this is you stepped out of your traditional service model to your clients and said, A, I need to know more about what you're doing across all your portfolios, right? And I need to look at your risk tolerance, your liquidity, compliance, like all these different things. We're going to learn a lot if we can see a lot more. And we're going to be able to help you a lot more. We're going to be able to differentiate a lot more based on what we're doing versus everything else. So it gives you a ton of insights, right, into their business and what they're doing and what they're not doing that positions you not as a partner, right, but actually more of like a peer or a colleague, right? Because now you have a perspective that all the other investment management firms don't have.
It is a little bit of a superpower there. And I think the other thing is it really starts to build that relationship and builds that trust with our clients, because we start to getting to know each other on a different level because we're offering a service to them as well as obviously what they can get from us. And it never starts with the product. It starts with what are you challenged with? Where can we help? And actually, we could do this piece of research or analysis for you for free. And would that be helpful? So you're starting on a goodwill gesture, which increases that trust.
I think everybody should just be thinking. I have a client I work with that they're an outsourced talent acquisition company, but they'll talk to their clients about workforce management, you know, taking it to the next level, because obviously the acquisition of talent needs to then transition into a workforce that is a high performance for you. So the key learning here is don't be afraid, right, to step up and say, hey, let's move the conversation up a level and out a level, and they're going to appreciate that, right? In many cases. Now, you mentioned that was a superpower. So there are other superpowers that as B2B companies we can grasp in our go-to-market plans, right? So I just wanted to ask you, when you use that, one of the greatest superpowers we have is the voice of the customer and listening to that voice of the customer. And by doing what you're doing and expanding and giving that added service to look across the portfolio, what that's really doing also is getting you into conversations that you wouldn't have been in, where you can learn from. How important are customer conversations? That's a phenomenal, one good way to do it, right? It's not the only way to have conversations.
It's not the only way to do it. So I also look after our client experience program and what we call our Net Promoter Score program here at Natixis Investment Managers. And this has been absolutely incredible to take on because I think the customer drives everything. And everyone talks about customer centricity, but unless you're actually doing it and it's embedded in everything that you do, then it isn't actually making a difference. And the couple of things that I would say is, as you mentioned, there's ways to do it. And we have our NPS scoring, which is our Net Promoter Score, looking at how satisfied our customers are with us. And the one thing I always say is my golden star metric or my North Star metric when it comes to this is whether you'd refer Natixis Investment Managers to a family or friend. And the reason why I say that is because you wouldn't recommend anyone to your mum and dad that you didn't explicitly trust. So that is a North Star metric for me because then it's actually really showing how much they engage with you, how much they trust you, and how much they're likely to do business with you. In addition to that, the other superpower that I've seen come into play and work really well is having these client advisory boards. So being able to actually test the product, test pricing, test messaging, and test an overall experience with the customer advisor board is going to hold you in really good stead because I think there's obviously the trust element coming in and how do they learn to trust you? That's going to build trust because they're seeing that you value their opinion and you value their input. But also, if their experience with you is improving as a firm, that's going to improve your credibility as well.
So basically, you put a lot of emphasis on understanding the voice of the customer. They're the highest authority in the business. There's not one business, if you ask the question, are you guys customer centric? Are you customer focused? Are you customer obsessed? Everybody's like, yes, absolutely. But it's the degree that we actually act on that, right? And we have to be in those customer conversations. And so let me get your opinion on this. A lot of companies that I talk to, they say where sales are in contact with prospects all the time. Our customer success team is in contact with our customers all the time. We're having those conversations all the time, right? The thing is that in a sales environment, you're being sold to. There's a shield that's up. It's not an open dialogue. Let's share, let's brainstorm, right? And it's been proven that the sales rep, on average in B2B, talks 2/3 to 3/4 of the time. So, yeah, there's some problems right there. In customer success, we're putting out fires. We're answering questions. We're trying to cross sell and upsell what we do, right? And so it's not an exploratory environment. You would never say a voice of the customer learning program, let's run it through sales. That's a great way to do it. Let's run it through customer success. We can learn from those things. So, your opinion on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is a focused effort from the CMO in service for the whole company to be that voice of the customer internally,
I
right?
think it's absolutely critical, but I would also say it's not just the role of the CMO, it's the role of everyone within the business. I think if you put it down to one department, whether that's sales or marketing, you're not going to be successful. So for me, it's about running programs. And one thing I would say is you bring up the challenge. If you run it through sales, it's got a different lens on it. What we do is we actually run it independently through a third party. And we do a qualitative research, which allows us to actually really have an engaged conversation with our customers to allow them to have free dialogue on the pain points that they're experiencing. And I think that the independent part brings it out. And the role that I see myself playing is actually taking that in and helping drive the action plans throughout the organization, whether that's client servicing, whether that's sales, whether that's marketing, whether that's communications, wherever it may be. actually help and start to enhance the customer experience for the client. And I think the critical part is if they're going to willingly give you their time to give you feedback, you have to showcase what you've done with that feedback. We fall into a trap of getting the feedback and then not actually actioning it. But that is one of the biggest mistakes that we could possibly make. We need to make sure that we articulate what we're going to do with their feedback and then share it back with them and show the progress that we've made.
So all this comes right around, right, back to building trust, right? If we're listening to our customers through the independent qualitative research, like the customer advisory boards, the opening up and saying, hey, we're going to give a free service. We're going to look at your entire portfolio and give you advice. And there's all kinds of conversations there. You've got a pretty robust program that can then, when you say put it into action, right? So how do we turn that into trust? There was a study that came out January of 2024 called the Trust Gap. And one of the things that came out of that was that 74% of B2B buyers do not trust the customer evidence that we present to them. So knowing that the difficulty, the job just got harder, that's another validation. I talked to a lot of companies and I asked them this question, and I'm not going to ask you this live on a podcast, but I asked them about how satisfied are you with things like your testimonials, your case studies, the things that we traditionally put a lot of time and effort into, and they're all okay. They tend to be like polished PR pieces by the time we get done with them. And that defeats the very purpose of building authenticity and trust and bringing that voice of the customer forward. How do we represent in an authentic way what we do for our clients to help build that trust?
That is a really tough question. There's no answer that is going to tick all the boxes here. And I think trust is so easily lost. So one misstep and it's much quicker to lose trust than it is to gain trust. So trust is something that is gained over a long period of time. So the first thing I would say, it goes back to the point before, it's about actually understanding your customers, understanding what their needs and the value that you can add to them. One point that I don't think I have made yet is that 70 to 80% of their interaction is actually before the point of sale. So really thinking about how you use those touch points with your clients to actually build that trust and build that messaging is going to be critical. I think one thing that we talk about quite a lot in financial services particularly is transparency. And that is a critical piece that if you're not being transparent, that is going to lose you trust pretty quickly. But a couple of the things that we do, I guess, in the financial services space is we really look to who we partner with to build that trust, particularly in markets where we're growing. And one thing is when we're looking at a product level, we're really looking at ratings agencies for that. So really having someone who has an independent view, who can actually give you a rating which compares you to your peers and actually being able to build that. And I think sometimes it's that independent view that will build that trust for you. But also in markets where you're not a big player, we do a lot of kind of strategic partnerships or co-marketing programs. So really showing where your values with companies that they may already be familiar with or someone who they may already be banking with or buying their insurance with, and then using those to come in and start to talk about the asset management products. So really doing that kind of affiliated piece to help build trust in those markets as well with clients that you may be less known with. So there are a couple of ideas of like how you can approach it. Like we've got to drive this internally and how do we get this to market?
How do you measure those efforts? Like, how do you know? Like, I could see if you're on a rating service, obviously you can see the ratings and everything. But a lot of what we're talking about here is all those individual touch points. How do we know we're doing the job? How do we measure this effort?
Yeah, and I think this is where the role of marketeers is also growing and changing as well. And I don't really see it as a chief marketing officer role anymore because we're being more tied to the commercial objectives. So we're looking at revenues, we're looking at growth. It's more around kind of those remits, and everything that I would do from a business perspective will still tie back to those commercial objectives, but also making sure that we meet customer needs. So the two kind of pieces that I'm looking at are the commercial objectives and then also the customer NPS scores and making sure that those satisfaction scores are there. When we're measuring them across the touch points, because we've got such a long sales life cycle and marketing is really looking after that kind of 80% mark before point of sale, it's really about how many people we get to that point of sale. So how many leads are we generating and how many deals are we creating for our sales team to actually then go in and implement? And I think that is a good measurement from that piece. But it doesn't stop there for me. It's all about how do you onboard clients and how do you make that a great experience for them that they want to come back and refer business to you. And that's where I talk about those North Star metrics if you're going to refer us to a family member or friend. If that makes sense.
Oh, it does. When it really comes down to it, trust is all about helping your clients meet the challenges, demonstrating that value. You talked a lot in our previous conversation about just being proactive, like proactive in problem solving. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think one thing is, particularly in financial services, when markets are volatile, when crises happen. We had one a couple of years ago where banks started to close overnight. That was quite scary for people. And I think where you actually build trust and partnership is how you support people through the difficult times. So when people are feeling uncomfortable, when they're feeling anxious about what's going to happen, actually making sure that you can communicate, making sure that you're proactive and you're saying, look, I know that you're concerned or worried. Look, this is our view on it. This is what our experts are saying. Hosting opportunities for them to engage with our professionals at that critical point is all going to build that trust in that relationship with you. So while you can't change the outcome of what's going to happen in those situations, for example, it does still allow you a platform to really connect with your clients, build that trust, and actually have a stronger relationship.
So here's one thing that we might want to talk about. And that is, before we started the recording, we started talking about, as a CMO, we're being charged with much more commercial responsibilities and direct impact on revenue. Like, our role is evolving and changing in a good way for all the right reasons. You mentioned in there that it shouldn't be like the voice of the customer shouldn't be the role of the CMO. I would have a question on that, which is, who's in charge? Who's in charge of the voice of the customer? Where does that responsibility to actually bring it together, translate it so all the different departments in the company actually can act on it, right? It's not going to be sales. It's not going to be customer success because they're not actually talking to prospects. It's not operations. It's who is it?
Well, it does fall to marketing. And I think that is where my role has evolved as well. You start as a chief marketing officer, but then over time you end up owning the client because we are owning those 70 to 80% of the touch points beforehand. We probably know now with data, we know more about the client. And that's a difficult message for salespeople to take in. And it has naturally fallen to marketing to basically be the person who collates of the customer view and actually shares that and builds that into how we're going to improve it. And I talked a little bit about how it expands across. It's not just marketing, it's not just communications and our digital touch points. It's how we engage in the sales process and then also how we board clients. In addition, how we communicate in crisis, it's how we retain clients. So that customer experience goes into all elements of it. And how we do it here at Natixis Investment Managers is that marketing actually run the qualitative research, and then we work with each of the different business arms to build action plans to make sure that we're all forming towards that one common goal of making sure that the client is embedded. I think where it's really helpful on that side is that it's actually in the CEO's mission statement and vision, and it's in his, our 2030 strategic plan. I'll use the full terminology here. And making sure that you have that buy-in from the top is critical as well. So while it can be owned by marketing and it's driven by marketing at this point, it has to be given that sponsorship from the top. And I think that's probably the key thing. Without that support, it won't work.
Absolutely. You have to have that support. And here's an interesting way to think about this. And I had a woman, she's a chief value accelerator advisor for Goldman Sachs. She's a three-time B2B CMO. And her point of view was that marketing, that your first customer is your internal customers, the different departments. And the voice of a customer as a service is what marketing is to the rest of the organization. That's the most important thing that you can do. So I just wanted to get your opinion, like on that line of thinking, that mentality.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure that I would agree with that. I think if I'm understanding it correctly, she's saying the internal businesses are kind of the first.
What she's saying is that we have two sets of customers. Let me reframe the question and we'll slice this. I just want to get your advice on something. I recently talked to a woman. She's a three-time B2B CMO. She's a chief value accelerator advisor for Goldman Sachs. Her perspective is that we have two very, very unique customers. We have our external customers, but we have our internal customers, all the other departments that need to learn from that voice of a customer. So her perspective is that marketing's role is really spearheading understanding the voice of the customer And then the translation of that is the service that we need to do internally to all the different organizations. That we're like a voice of a customer as a service to all the rest of the departments internally.
So that I would definitely agree with. I think some of those departments don't have the opportunity to speak to customers or have that engagement one-to-one with customers. So there is a critical role for marketing there to make sure that voice is being heard and making sure that feedback is reaching the relevant teams. And I think within our role at Natixis Investment Managers looking after CX, our role is to actually build that action plan with the departments to make sure that you say, look, this is what the customer said, this feedback, how do we want to progress it? And then here's the action plan, and then taking that to the board and getting the CEO sign off on that. So it's really about having that top down engagement, but also sharing it with the rest of the business to make sure everyone's moving to accelerate in the right direction.
I'm so glad you keep bringing up CX because McKinsey did a study in 2023 that said of 400 highly profitable companies, that the number one differentiator amongst that group of companies, B2C and B2B, was the number one differentiator was CX. It wasn't their product, it was the experience versus their competitors that they were creating.
Yeah. To be honest, I do think that this is where the game change is because it's the overall experience they have with you. If they have a great pre-sales experience, a great sales experience, and then a poor onboarding experience, you're still not going to retain that customer next time around. So I think you have to look at CX overall. And then if you look at it a little bit more from a marketing lens, the one that I would call out was the Royal Bank of Scotland. And they did this campaign back to the 70s, and it was all about using big data to understand what their client challenges were, actually starting to say, okay, we understand that this is your challenge, and then positioning, messaging, and then they may not have had the best product in the market, but they understood their client the best. And they gave them a seamless journey of them saying, okay, yes, I do have that challenge. How do I resolve it? Oh, here it is. And oh, it was easy for me to do. So therefore, those kind of experiences are the things that people remember. And it's easy to do business with. That is going to increase your commercials.
I want to answer this question myself, but I want to ask it to you because what I want to know is what you want us all to have from everything that we've been talking about here in building trust and how that be the foundation for our relationships. What's the number one takeaway that we should take away from this conversation?
I think I'll probably go back to a quote again, because I think they're probably the most catching. And I think it's two things. Without trust, you have nothing. And I think we spoke about that at quite a big length. But also, I think there's a part where most people will like you. And if they like you, they'll listen to you. But unless they trust you, they won't do business with you. So that is why trust is the most critical part of it.
Well, all I have to say is I think there's going to be some questions that people have after watching this because it's been such an incredible conversation. Would it be appropriate if we gave out a link to your LinkedIn profile that if people wanted to, they could reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. No problem.
Emily, thank you so much. I could have this conversation for hours because I think it's at the heart of what we need to be doing as B2B companies. And building trust should be the top of the priority list. It should be the things we're talking about with the board, with the C-suite, with our teams. It's that CX, right? That experience overall and everything we do at all those stages that's going to build that trust factor up. Just thank you. Thank you for adding color commentary to this conversation.
And thank you so much for your time and for having me on the show.